Hello and welcome everyone on this official platform of Legacy IAS Academy. So today we are going to discuss as well as analyze India's foreign policy in 2025. As 2025 is going to end and 2026 is going to start, so we need to understand what are the achievements in India's foreign policy and what are the challenges which are faced by India in 2025. The year the world did not move the way India expected. In January 2025, India stood at a rare moment in history. Political continuity at home, economic weight abroad, and the world in flux, desperate for leadership. So, from Washington to Moscow, from Beijing to Dhaka, the expectation was clear that this would be India's year, a year when diplomacy would shape global rules, when strategic autonomy would finally mean strategic leverage, and when India would move from the margins of world politics to its very center. But something unexpected happened. The year did not fold as a story of grand breakthrough. It is, or you can say, it's unfolded as a story of missed openings, rising pressures, and shrinking space. Tariffs returned this year where partnerships were promised. Borders stayed, that too also tense, where, or you can say, where peace talks were staged. Energy security became vulnerable. Neighborhood influence quietly slipped away. And suddenly the question has been changed this year, that it was no longer, is India rising? It became this year, is India being pushed into reacting rather than leading? So let me tell you that this is not a story of failure. It is a story of limits, of symbolism colliding with hard power, as well as it also colliding with the global disorder, and that is actually testing the national ambition and of a country discovering that visibility does not always equal influence. So in this scenario and in this video, we are going to decode 2025, the year India's foreign policy promised much, delivered selectively, and revealed uncomfortable truths about power, autonomy, and credibility in an increasingly transactional world. So stay with me till the end, because by the end of this video, you may see India's global journey very differently than before. So let's start with this session, that what was expected and what actually happened in 2025. So let's begin with the introduction, like what was expected. Okay, and what actually happened. Two things we need to understand. Okay, so now try to understand that India entered 2025 with political continuity, with the same government, you can say, and a growing economy. Now, expectations. There were expectations of active global diplomacy. Okay, there were expectations regarding the planned goals, like strong bilateral visits will be there. As you can see here, strong bilateral visits, new free trade agreements will be signed, regional leadership will be there. But in reality, instead of leading the global agendas, India was forced to react to the crisis and the problems that emerged in economic security, energy security, strategic autonomy, regional security, etc. So, from these things, we can say that there was a gap between ambition and delivery. Okay, there was a gap between ambition as well as delivery. Now, did India's economic and energy security fail in 2025? This is the biggest question here. So as you can see here that when we analyze these things, so first thing that comes in our mind is tariff escalation. Okay. So what about US trade actions this year? The United States of America under Trump imposed a 25% of reciprocal tariff on Indian goods. And this tariff affected various sectors like apparel sector, gems and jewelry, seafood, etc. Now, let me tell you, these sectors, if you see these sectors, these are labor intensive sectors. So, job losses occurred here. Okay. Then, second important thing with respect to the India-US relations. Now, what about India-US relations? What was the expected? There was a hope that if Trump is going to come this year, in 2025, so there were hopes of a smooth reset under the Donald Trump's second term. But the things got reversed, like GSP. Now, what is GSP? As you can see here, GSP withdrawal legacy, generalized system of preference. GSP means generalized system of preference. Okay. Now, generalized system of preference. Earlier it was withdrawn, still not restored, and this has increased the export pressure on India. Now, apart from this, energy security problems. Now, what are the energy security problems? The United States of America imposed a surcharge on Russian oil import. Imposed surcharge. Okay. Now, in this way, India became the most heavily tariffed buyer. Yes, India became the most heavily tariffed buyer of Russian oil. Costs rose sharply. These things are there. Then apart from this, investment impact, investment uncertainty. Now, what are the investment impact? Factory level job losses reported this year. Export contracts are delayed. Okay. Business uncertainty also got increased. And what about free trade agreements? So if we see free trade agreements, so negotiations ongoing with United Kingdom, negotiations ongoing with Oman, New Zealand, clear. So all these things are there. But this year we have seen no major free trade agreements signed with United States of America as well as European Union. Yes, no major free trade agreement. Remember this thing, no major free trade agreements signed with US and European Union. So overall, we can say that economic diplomacy underperformed this year. Now, next important thing is, did China engagement deliver strategic stability? Or did China engagement, or you can say, did engagement with China bring strategic stability? So let's try to understand. First, we need to understand the diplomatic engagement. This year, high-profile meetings like between Modi and Xi Jinping took place, which actually improved the optics and symbolism. Okay. Second important thing. What about ground reality at LAC? There is no rollback. Okay. No rollback of Chinese military deployment. No new confidence building measures. But border tensions still continued. Then third important thing, economic barriers. Chinese investment restrictions stayed, trade regulations unchanged. This was there with China. Then what about, so recently one incident occurred last month, consular incident. Now what was that incident? Let's try to understand. an Indian airline passenger detained in Shanghai, and that detention continued for a long time. That actually raised concerns over India's diplomatic leverage. So, overall outcome, if you see, engagement created strategic ambiguity. There is no real de escalation. That means symbolism without security outcomes this year. Okay. Now, apart from this, has India's Russia policy reached its limits? As you can see here, India's Russia policy reached strategic limits. So let's try to understand this. First, we need to understand India and Russia from the perspective of energy dependence. Now, with respect to energy dependence, Russian oil import reached $52 billion. Yes, Russian oil import reached $52 billion. And this was the peak level after sanctions easing. Then, this year, India has seen renewed sanctions pressure from United States of America. So, new United States sanctions revived the uncertainty. So, sustainability of oil imports in 2025 questioned. Now, apart from this, recently in this month itself, India-Russia summit. Now, what happened in India-Russia summit? So, first of all, I have already made a video on India-Russia summit on Legacy IAS Academy YouTube channel that no major agreements in defense sector, in nuclear energy, as well as space cooperation. Now, what about the reputation cost then? Again, it seems like growing global polarization. Now, India in 2025 faced alignment dilemmas. And the last important thing that we need to understand in Russia is strategic autonomy strain. Now, how strategic autonomy strain? So, as you can see here, this is from the perspective of balancing. Like India needs to balance Western pressure, Eurasian partnerships, and these things became increasingly costly. So, this is actually a strain on India's strategic autonomy. Overall, if you see, Russia's foreign policy or India's foreign policy towards Russia faced diminishing returns. Yes, India's foreign policy towards Russia faced diminishing returns. Now, is global strategic space shrinking for India? So, we need to understand this thing. Like recently, US National Security Strategy 2025. So, Trump has actually launched this US National Security Strategy 2025. Now, this strategy is actually softer, but unclear approach towards China and Russia. So, if we see this strategy, so in National Security Strategy of 2025, Trump has given softer stand on China and Russia. Okay, India was just like another partner in this strategy. Okay, that was a change came in 2025. Then another important thing, India's reduced global role. India mainly mentioned in Indo-Pacific security, but India is not recognized as a global strategic partner. Then apart from this, G2 speculation or G2 concerns. Donald Trump repeatedly referred to Xi Jinping, which created the fears of US-China dominance and India's marginalization. So these concerns are also there. Now, another important thing, it seems like rule-based order started weakening. Now, how rule-based order started weakening? First important thing, ceasefire proposals towards Gaza as well as Ukraine. So, ceasefire proposals in Gaza and Ukraine. This actually reduced the accountability for violations. And the last important thing, China's governance push. Beijing actually promoted a global governance framework that has actually challenged the existing international institutions. And what is the outcome of all these things? That India's global space actually narrowed. Okay. Now, the question here is, in this 2025, did regional security challenges expose diplomatic, or you can say diplomatic weakness? So let's try to understand that did regional security challenges expose the diplomatic weakness in 2025? So let's try to understand. The first important event is Pahalgam terror attack. As you can see here, Pahalgam terror attack, April 2025. This actually showed continued cross-border terrorism. It actually showed the security vulnerabilities. Okay. And then it is followed by another event called as Operation Sindoor, which is considered as military effective retaliation. But this actually lagged the sustained diplomatic follow-up or backing. Then what about international response? Okay, very few countries openly supported India in Operation Sindoor. Apart from this year India has actually seen neighborhood instability, like with respect to Bangladesh, political instability, with respect to Nepal, internal political uncertainty, as well as Gen Z protest. Now, what about the Pakistan situation? Now, when we talk about Pakistan situation, now, what about Pakistan situation? So, there is a rise of ultra hardline leadership. Rise of ultra hardline leadership and reduced crisis management space, which means the outcome of this is military strength without diplomatic backing. So this year India has actually seen military strength can be seen in 2025, but without diplomatic backing. Now, another important question here is, has India's neighborhood policy lost momentum? What is the scenario? First, Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh. Okay. Now, so with respect to the neighborhood, we can see here with respect to Bangladesh. With respect to Bangladesh, post-protest regime change. Okay. Post-protest regime change. Okay, this was seen. Then this actually reversed the earlier diplomatic gains. Then another important thing is, another important country, Nepal. Now with respect to Nepal, what was seen this year? Weak transitional government. So weak transitional government as well as limited cooperation. Okay, limited cooperation. Then other neighboring countries like Myanmar. Myanmar. So this year, let me tell you that India engaged with military junta. India engaged with military junta, and India also talk about deposed leadership. Deposed leadership. But with this, there are no tangible outcomes. No tangible outcomes. Okay. Then apart from this, human rights dilemma. Yes, human rights dilemma. See, India avoided speaking on democracy. Very important thing. Human rights dilemma. Okay. India avoided speaking on democracy. Strategic silence conflicted with these stated values. So overall influence, if we see, India appeared reactive in 2025 with respect to foreign policy, but not agenda setter or agenda setting. Okay, so overall, if we see 2025, the neighborhood first policy of India got weakened. This is the scenario. Now, what are the lessons does 2025 offers for India's foreign policy? Okay, what are the key lessons from 2025? First lesson is that we need to understand performative diplomacy has limits. Yes, that is true. That performative diplomacy has its limits, which means it means summits and optics does not give real outcomes this year. When we say summit and optics did not give real outcomes, what does this mean? See, let me tell you that taking photos, holding big summits, issuing joint statement and strong speeches do not automatically change the reality. Real diplomacy is actually judged by what actually changes on the ground. That is important. So, for example, let me give you one example. In 2025, India had high-profile meetings like Modi Xi Jinping meeting was there, G20 legacy diplomacy, but Chinese troops did not withdraw from the LAC. No new confidence-building mechanisms were created. Similarly, despite close India-US optics, US imposed 25% tariffs on Indian exports. So the lessons that we need to understand from here is good optics without results. It just creates an illusion of success, not real power. Okay. Second important thing that we need to understand, credibility deficit risk or credibility risk. Like silence on these sensitive issues, it reduces the trust. What does this mean? When a country avoids speaking clearly on the difficult issues, other countries begin to doubt its reliability. That silence can look like inconsistency or opportunism. For example, let me tell you one important, I would like to quote here one important example. India remained largely silent on human rights issues in Myanmar. Democratic backsliding in neighborhood countries. At the same time, India expects global support on the issues like terrorism, on border violations. So what would be the result? During the Pahalgam terror attack, April 2025, very few countries openly backed India. So the lesson that India needs to learn from here is when you don't speak for the norms consistently, others may not stand with you when you need them. Okay. Then the third important thing is normative inconsistency. Like external democracy, like here, external democracy advocacy versus internal minority concerns. Now, what does this mean? India often speaks internationally about democracy, about rule of law, about human rights, but questions are raised about treatment of minorities at home itself. What about civil liberties at home? This actually creates a credibility gap. Like, for example, India promotes itself as the world's largest democracy, but international media and human rights group frequently questions the minority rights in India, freedom of expression in India. Okay, this actually weakens India's moral authority when criticizing the authoritarian regimes, supporting the democratic movements abroad. So a lesson that we need to learn from here is a country's global moral voice is not, or you can say is only as strong as its democratic practice. Then apart from this, narrative recalibration or narrative confusion. I would say here narrative confusion. Now how narrative confusion? Now this year, like you can say from 2023 onwards, India started propagating that there is a shift from Vishwaguru to Vishwamitra. But it lacked clarity. What does this mean? When we say Vishwaguru, what is the meaning of Vishwaguru? India as a global teacher. India as a global teacher or a leader. Getting my point? Vishwamitra, India as a global friend and a global partner. So this shift happened, but no clear policy roadmap is followed. For example, India reduced overt moral leadership language, but did not clearly define what kind of friend India wants to be, what commitments it is ready to make. For example, Operation Sindoor showed military action, but Operation Sindoor lacked sustained diplomatic engagement afterward. So a lesson that we need to learn from here is a narrative without the strategy becomes just a slogan. And then the last important thing is strategic self-reflection. There is a need for strategic self-reflection. Now, for example, recognition of double standards is necessary. What does this mean? Even the major power has contradictions. And the problem arises when these contradictions are denied and not acknowledged. Okay? For example, India criticizes Western hypocrisy on Gaza or Ukraine. But India also avoids criticism of partners when strategic interests are involved. So this selective approach makes India appear pragmatic to some and hypocritical to others. So India needs to learn one lesson from here. Acknowledging the limitations, it increases the credibility. Denying them reduces the trust. This we need to understand. So overall, we can say here that 2025 actually exposed a weak delivery of India's foreign policy, over-reliance on symbolism. Strategic autonomy needs still economic, you can say, resilience. Okay. Strategic autonomy needs consistency. It needs credibility. That is why India must align with, you can say, align power with principle. India must align power with principles. Focus on results, not optics. Because global order is becoming highly transactional in nature. This is the scenario. Getting my point? Okay. Now, let's try to understand some additional things. Like how was India's foreign policy under Modi government from 2014 to 2025? So let's try to understand. First thing is strategic reorientation. That means we actually shifted, India actually shifted from reactive to assertive diplomacy. Okay, reactive to assertive diplomacy, and the focus on national interest. Now, the guiding doctrine, what is the guiding doctrine? Sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas, sabka prayas. Then with respect to regional and neighborhood outreach. So regional and neighborhood outreach, first important thing is neighborhood first policy. Neighborhood first policy. When we say neighborhood first policy, the focus should be on stability. Focus should be on stability. Okay, the focus should be on connectivity. So the focus should be on connectivity. Then the focus should be on development aid. Focus should be on crisis support. Okay. So, neighborhood first policy should focus on these four important pillars. So, this is about neighborhood. Then, with respect to India's foreign policy, another important thing is extended neighborhood. So, try to understand the extended neighborhood as well. Now, extended neighborhood. In extended neighborhood, there are various policies. So, three important directions I would like to mention here. First is Act East. Clear? Second, Think West. Think West. And third, Connect Central Asia. Connect Central Asia. Okay. Now, when we say Act East, so in these two important regions, ASEAN and Indo-Pacific region. Indo-Pacific region. Then when we say think West, so in this West Asia, Gulf region. Gulf region. Then connect Central Asia, that is connectivity with Eurasia as well. That is why extended neighborhoods is important. And then we cannot neglect the maritime Sagar doctrine, security and growth for all. Now, Sagar doctrine, security and growth for all. It talks about, so here India seen as you can say net security provider. It talks about Indian Ocean security. It talks about regional cooperation. It talks about inclusive growth. Okay. Apart from this, there are other important aspects in India's foreign policy, like India is becoming self-reliant in terms of defense sector. Atmanirbhar. So defense self-reliance and strategic partnership. First is Atmanirbhar defense. That means indigenous manufacturing, reduce import dependence. Second important thing here is INS Vikrant Commission. Ji haan. So in this complex defense platforms are there, Blue Water Navy ambitions of India. Then IDEX framework, which talks about the startups, MSMEs and academia in defense with respect to research and development. Apart from this, humanitarian diplomacy and crisis response. So India did major operations from 2020 onwards. Like, let me tell you, Operation Dost. India became first responder also. So Operation Dost with respect to Turkey-Syria earthquake 2023. Operation Ganga, when the Ukraine war was started. So India did Operation Ganga, evacuate the people 2022. Then Operation Devi Shakti with respect to Afghanistan in 2021 when Taliban came to power. And then Mission Sagar, that is the Indian Ocean Region Outreach Mission in 2020. So in all these things, India emerged as a first responder. Then apart from this, global leadership and multilateralism. Now when we talk about global leadership and multilateralism, so there are various initiatives which are taken by India, like ISA, International Solar Alliance. International Solar Alliance. Then CDRI. Now what is CDRI? You also read these things in disaster management. Coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Then apart from this, life movement, so various leadership roles are there. So overall, what would be the impact? India actually positioned as a norm player. Then G20 presidency 2023. What was the theme of G20 presidency? Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Okay, what are the achievements of G20 presidency 2023? Africa Union became permanent. Africa Union. So Africa Union became permanent G20 member. Now what was the focus of G20? Focus was on global south. Focus was on debt relief. And the focus was on digital public infra. Okay, these were the focuses. So overall, we can say that from optics to outcome, the choice before India. If 2025 taught us one lesson, it is this, that the world no longer rewards intention, only outcomes. India did not disappear from global diplomacy in 2025. It was present everywhere, like in summits, dialogues, strategic forums, crisis rooms, everywhere. But the presence alone could not prevent the tariffs. It could not guarantee the borders. It could not stabilize the neighborhood. And it could not expand strategic space in a world drifting towards the great power bargaining. So what we witnessed was not the collapse of India's foreign policy, but the exposure of its stress points. So strategic autonomy without economic insulation, it actually proved fragile. Okay. Symbolic engagement without security guarantee, it proved hollow. And the regional leadership without political consistency proved actually difficult to sustain. Yet, this is also where the story turns, because the moments of constraints are also moments of course correction. So, India actually today stands at a crossroad to continue investing in optics or to rebuild diplomacy around the credibility, or the resilience as well as hard outcomes. So, the shift from Vishwaguru to Vishwamitra will matter only if friendship is backed by the leverage, if friendship is backed by the values, by consistency, and ambition by execution. So the world is actually becoming colder, faster, and more transactional. And in such a world, influence is not announced. It is actually enforced through trust, through capacity, and clarity. The question is no longer whether India has arrived on the global stage or not. It has already. The real question is, will India shape the stage or simply adjust to the script written by the others? The answer will define not just the next year, but the next decade of India's place in the world. So thank you for watching. This is all about India's foreign policy 2025. And soon we are going to come with the India's foreign policy in 2026, that is expectations and how India is going to tackle the challenges of 2025. Thank you so much.